Good evening, everybody. Hello, I'm glad to see you guys here. We're not at the Power Center. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the first in a series of annual events that we are doing that we refer to as the Beatle Years. We will be doing one of these events every year for the next 5 years. You're all welcome. We hope that the family grows in size. By the way, some of you are probably wondering why we had Pop-Tarts out in the lobby. The reason why we had Pop-Tarts out in the lobby is because the Pop-Tart was invented in 1964. So we thought you might enjoy some Pop-Tarts in 1964. In 2003, Time magazine did a cover article on what they considered the 80 most significant days in the history of the world. That is to say, 80 days that changed the world. February 9th, 1964 is one of those days. Specifically, they selected that day because that is the day that the Beatles performed for the first time on national television live on the Ed Sullivan Show. It is also considered, February 9th, 1964, as the single most important night in U.S. television history. Again, they are referring to, in that description, the February 9th event, that Sunday night, the night that the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan. Those two significant assessments essentially are the reason why we have this topic tonight. Okay? See, I like to say that life is a joke. And it's my job to make sure everybody gets it. Okay? So tonight, my goal is to take you back to that magical, simpler time in 1964 when the Beatles started what we now refer to as the 1960s. So no joke, what I'd like to do first is thank some extremely important people that made this night as special as it is for all of us. Andy Beasom is lurking around in the dark here. You'll get to meet him in a little bit. Andy has been one of my co-conspirators since the day this was invented in our brains. He produced a film that we're going to see in a little bit, and he is an enormously talented and creative and supportive guy. And when I was slipping, he was always there to catch me. Jordan Mroziak is coming out. He's going to present in a little bit on the musical climate of the time. Again, a very supportive and intelligently creative person. Kevin Smith is amongst us, who created the single most memorable and excellent poster for this event, and I thank him for that. Dan McCarthy was going to host us over in the Power Center. We had such an audience that we had to move over here, so I thank Dan. Public Affairs, Allison Conti ran with this idea. I thank them for doing that. Tom Haas and Dean Ed Coker were tremendously supportive in providing us with a venue for the interviews and stuff that you'll see. I thank them for that. John Lane, I believe, is here, who is our Director of Theater Arts, dear friend of our families, and enormous supporter of this event, and I thank him. They moved, I guess, a technical or a performance rehearsal this night in this space in order to allow us to be here, so I thank John very much. Sharon Oshliger and Rebecca Mroziak of Student Life assisted in the promotion, and B.J. Williamson, David Wheaton, and a number of the computer store staff were very supportive both financially and so on. So I'd like to thank those people if you can join me. I appreciate that. So I'd like to take you back to the fall of 1963. My mother worked at this dry goods store called Horns. Some of you might have heard of it. It's no longer here now, right? In downtown Pittsburgh. And a co-worker of hers named Ron Jones sent something home to her two boys. This record. Sent this record home, okay? This is September 1963. My brother and I get this record, okay? This is our first introduction to popular music, and clearly the first introduction to the Beatles for us. Again, September 1963, right? So, by the way, this thing I'm holding in my hand is 28 months shy of being a half a century old. So this is almost 50 years old. It still plays. I played it just to make sure that it did. Okay. And so the reality is that so we have this album, and we are listening to the Beatles. Okay. So somewhere around January 1964, my mother's telling us to turn it down. I don't even remember what age I am. So somewhere around January 1964, my mother becomes a little concerned because these bugs, something from England is on its way, right? these Beatle things are coming in 1964. Well, my brother and I knew that this was not Beatles with an E. This, in fact, was Beatles with an A. You see, we had been listening to this for 3 months. We knew how cool these guys were. In other words, we already got the joke. We didn't think it was that big of a deal. We're like, of course, these guys are great. Come on, join in. We love them. Okay? So we weren't very surprised at the time when, at least my brother and I weren't very surprised when we heard that the Beatles were coming. So let me tell you a little bit about the inspiration for this event. The inspiration for this is pretty interesting. Okay? First, I want to mention that I did an event like this 33 years ago at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. So that was like the beta for this event. So we've kind of done this before. But the inspiration for this event had, with my 2 boys who are here, we went to see Sir Paul McCartney open the Console Center this summer. Who were here? Give me an applause. I can't see anybody there. Great. Great show. So in December, right, we were watching an outdoor concert of Paul McCartney like this with my boys. And yeah, we were re-enjoying that show. But my 2 boys really enjoyed that show, I promise you. I'd like you to meet Owen and Tanner. Can you guys come up here? Owen and Tanner, just come and say hi to everybody. Give them a thumbs up. Oh, it's Tanner and Owen, big Beatle fans. Give them a thumbs up. Thank you, guys. The ring from help. Thank you, guys. This is where you leave. So a Klaus Voormann special was running on the Biography channel in December. Owen and Tanner and I were watching it. And Owen looks at me, and these boys have been watching the Beatles literally since they were really tiny, Hard Day's Night Help, and so on. And Owen's watching Sir Paul, big outdoor concert, and he says, wow, Paul McCartney really got older, okay? And he says, John Lennon's dead. John Lennon's dead. Kind of got missed. He says, George Harrison is dead. And he asked me, is Paul McCartney going to die? I'm not making this up, guys. He says, Paul McCartney going to die? I said, Owen, yes, at some point in time, Paul McCartney's going to die. But you got to see him. In your life, you got to see him open the Console Center, and you were there, you saw him live. Not every child gets to do that. He says, Dad, promise me something. When Paul McCartney is on his deathbed, would you promise to take me to him? He said, because I want to promise to Paul McCartney that I will continue what he started when he was here. That's the inspiration for tonight. That's why we invited you, okay? So we go from the emotional to the academic, all right? 2 weeks ago, Hope University in London awarded the first master's degree in the Beatles and popular music in society. I'm really disappointed they didn't invite me to faculty, but I will deal with that later. So anyways, so there is an academic quality to this that is undeniable, okay? Again, another reason why we're here. So what I'd like to do is take you back a little bit. Andy Beasom and myself have spent the past month and a half speaking to people about this night, February 4th, 1964. What I'd like to do now is share with you 4 very diverse experiences with amazing commonality.
My life seemed really simple in '64. I mean, the gas was, I can't remember exactly the price, but it was in the neighborhood of between 12 and 20 cents a gallon. And you always got a free car wash with it, and usually a free glass. Drive-ins were really popular. McDonald's was just coming into the era, but the drive-ins with the with the waitresses who had roller skates. There was a Peninsula Drive-in, I remember, up in Erie, and it was you'd go there and park your car and flash the lights, and the waitress would come out and get your order. Then they'd come back and they'd hang a tray on the side of your. So you ate out. You ate in your car a lot.
So 1964 was one of those years where, you know, we were slowly starting to kind of recover from the assassination. We had not gotten bogged down in Vietnam yet, right? It was a good time. At least it seemed that way to me.
I would say one of the main differences is the innocence of everything back then compared to now. If I think about my 12-year-old niece or 14-year-old nephew, and like everything, MTV, I guess, changed everything.
When I think about February 9th, I think that it was the day that changed my life. That moment, seeing those guys on there playing those guitars, influenced everything that would come later in my life.
I mean, I recall that, you know, the Beatles were, you know, coming to America. Hadn't really heard of them. They were going to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show. Okay, you know, we'll watch it, right? We watched the Ed Sullivan Show every Sunday night. You know, you'd see the twirling plates and, you know, the dancing dogs and that sort of thing. And then when the Beatles came on, you know, we knew that there was something that was going to happen that was special. And it was, you know, I'm at home with my parents and my brother. So it wasn't like there was a huge crowd of people, but you just felt that sense of excitement.
Probably one of the biggest events in television history, even though at that moment it was an event, but it wasn't as big as it was later on. That night, that Sunday night on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was magic because everybody watched it.
Well, everyone would just watch the Ed Sullivan Show. Sit in front of the little black and white TV, and that every time the Beatles, I was really into the Beatles though when I was turned 9 or 10, whenever they came out.
Well, you have to understand in those days there were only 3 channels, and they went off at, what, 11:30. And Ed Sullivan was the premier entertainment venue.
I was a changed person. My friends and I would pretend to be the Beatles, right? So I remember walking out and buying Meet the Beatles, right? The album that sort of came out, you know, around that same time, putting it on the old, you know, monographic, you know, record player, and opening the garage door and standing in the garage with brooms and mops and pretending that we were the Beatles.
I had a friend of mine made little cardboard replicas of all the guitars. I had the Hofner bass, the Rickenbacker, the Gretsch, and I would make believe I was one of the Beatles, you know.
For me, that was the era when I was starting my career as a disc jockey. So it was very formative in my life.
Music was changed by them because they inspired an entire generation of kids to get together with their friends, learn to play guitar, and form a band. So it suddenly went from a famous entertainer is just a guy singer to famous entertainers are bands.
And that music, just because I played it so much and listened to it so much, to me that was kind of what drove me. And later on, when I went to Vietnam, the music was a driving force for Vietnam veterans.
I have no idea.
Rock and roll, and actually even popular music, started with me on that day.
The Beatles on Ed Sullivan was an incredibly unique event. It's hard to put it in perspective now because we have so much information available to us with the internet and YouTube. But back then, information kind of dribbled out.
if you look at some of the early pictures of the Beatles when they were fresh and they were young, and you look at their faces and you realize that, you know, they seemed like just kids, but they also were bucking a trend, and that's in hairstyle. They were creating a look that parents were absolutely appalled at. That was the crew cut era. That was the era when your hair was always really short. And then to start wearing hair, and boys wearing bangs, and parents were going nuts. The Beatles probably drove more parents to yell at their children than any other change in the history of mankind.
There was just something cool about the fact that they were British, and I think we as kids who liked the Beatles felt cool being fans of a group that was British, right? It made you feel a little bit more worldly or sophisticated or something. And, you know, to a large extent, I still feel that way. The hair was very different, right?
It's always Americans fall for the British accent a lot.
So suddenly, at the end of January, we have the Capitol promotional machine telling everybody in the world the Beatles are coming to be in Ed Sullivan. As that's happening, we have the Capitol album, Meet the Beatles, released. We have the Capitol 45, I Want to Hold Your Hand, released. And suddenly we have the VJ album, Introducing the Beatles, released. And meanwhile, there's still the Swan label that has She Loves You to put out. And so there was just like Beatles everywhere.
It was such a seminal moment in rock history. What does that mean? Somebody look that up for me, will you?
But by the time they made it to America, they were practically a worldwide success story with a lot of concerts. So they had tremendous confidence. When they appeared in Ed Sullivan, you could just enjoy how easy it was for them to do that.
People were becoming a little weary, frankly, of the post-1950s era, you know, sort of, I think it's still called beach music, right? It can be a little mind-numbing, frankly. And that's not to take anything away from the great acts of that era, but there were an awful lot of sound-alike, look-alike groups, and I think people were looking for something different, and then it came along.
So I don't know that Capitol's ads had that much of an impact on us. What I remember is newspaper articles and word of mouth, and most importantly, radio airplay.
"1964 was my first job in radio, WJET, big-time rock and roll disc jockey. Well, I thought I was a big-time rock and roll disc jockey. I got a chance to play the records. I got a chance to play Beatle 45 RPM records. And this is long before the days of actually easy-to-use audio tape.
I had this record player that had like a little latch on it, and you'd pull the turntable down, and then there was a little single speaker at the back of it, right? And then you'd put your record on, and it would start playing, right? And then occasionally there'd be a scratch on the record, and so, you know, it might start to skip or something, and so you'd take a penny or two and you'd put it on top of the stylus to hold the needle down so it would play. And the sound quality obviously was not very good, but at the time it seemed fine.
We had a flip-top 45, well, a flip-top phonograph like this, you know, and then you play a little record on there. And then the parents had one of those low things, like cocktail table type of thing with the sliding door, and then you could put the stuff down in like that. I believe in that case the speakers would be facing the ground, because that was probably playing background music for parties and stuff. But then we had one of the little ones, all plastic. And then the spring that held the tone arm up would get loose, and the arm wouldn't stay on there, so you had to put a quarter on the tone arm to hold it in place. Of course, that probably ruined the record.
You would get a shipment of records from the record companies. You weren't told what to play. You decided what to play with, as long as within the format. But there's always a starred side, and it had a big star on it. That's the side the record producer said that's the one you should play. Well, the Beatles didn't have just one-sided hits. A lot of times you flip it over, and there was another song is equally as good on the B-side. That wasn't always the case with a lot of records. A lot of records, they had an A side, and the B side was just a song on there for some reason, because they felt they needed to fill up the other side.
We had a den where the television was, and the television was part of the record player. There was the TV and the record player, you know, one of those console things. And so that's where all the records were, 45s and the album.
Students today don't necessarily have that family time. 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock on Sunday night was family time, where everybody was in the living room. You did not go outside. You did not have any scheduled events. You were in your living room, and you were with a family watching an event that happened every single Sunday.
People tended to watch television shows collectively, right? And as a result, it wouldn't surprise me if the crime rate did not go down. You know, just like water pressure falls during commercials of, you know, the Ed Sullivan Show or whatever else. It was a time when, you know, entertainment was a more collective activity and experience.
Ed Sullivan was the premier entertainment venue to see what was going on. It was Sunday night, family all gathered around to watch and see whatever Las Vegas comedian was going to be on, and Topo Gigio, the mouse. And so, yeah, of course, we watched Ed Sullivan every Sunday.
I remember the meeting we had of the Beatles in Cleveland. We met them, we took a bus from Erie, and we took a bus and met the Beatles in Cleveland as they came off the plane. I was about 10 feet from them, so I was pretty close, but I think my ears were permanently damaged by the screams, literally, and I think you hear that if you watch the Sullivan Show, and you watch, the girls were just constantly screaming, and it was so loud you almost couldn't hear the Beatles. When students today watch this black and white television kinescope, which is the way they recorded television shows on film and then eventually made them onto videotape. When they watch this event, you have to think about, first of all the effort that it took for Sullivan to get this group into New York City, into the Ed Sullivan Theater, and to be able to get them to perform a couple songs, because they were big at the time. It wasn't like they were an unknown group. You know, he had some early unknown groups on, but the Beatles were big. And this event, I don't think you could ever duplicate it in television today.
I think for students today, you know, a lot of students, which I find very gratifying, love the Beatles, right? And love the Beatles as much as you and I love the Beatles. But I think they also, I know, you know, having taught many college students, they also love the music of the 1960s, right? And in many cases, maybe in, well, I shouldn't say most cases, I don't want to speak for them, but in many cases, more than the music of their own era, right? So I'll talk to students about, well, what do you like to listen to? And they'll say, you know, I'll say, well, you know, do you like Usher or so? And they go, no, I like Creedence, you know, I like the Rolling Stones, you know, that sort of thing. And what they're really saying is that they love the music of the 1960s, right? And in my view, all of that music of the 1960s is heavily indebted to the Beatles.
That whole reality is gone. The way reality was in 1964, and some say after Kennedy got shot too, I mean, killed, that changed everything. So that was what.
I was talking to one of the guys that works for me, and he said the Beatles, to him, represent happiness. It was an important time in our lives, the lives of the baby boomers, in your early teens when you're still developing as a human being. And there was so many Beatles songs out, and they came out so often, and they just made us so happy. I think they made the world happy. So When I look back on it, the Beatles represent a very happy time in all of our lives.
A couple other things I want to cover real quick here. First of all, let's take a look at this. What was this cultural and social climate in 1964? I think this is tremendously interesting. If you look at the time, 1963 to 1964, look at those prices. Very, very significant, right? You literally could move the decimal 1 point and you'd essentially reach the value of things like a house or a car today. It's pretty significant stuff. So, let's turn on our little tiny black and white televisions and let's go back to 1963 and 1964.
Members of the Congress, I have the great pleasure, the high privilege, and the great honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker, members of the 88th Congress, I congratulate you all, not merely on your electoral victory, but on your selected role in history. For you and I are privileged to serve the great republic in what could be the most decisive decade in its long history. The choices we make, for good or ill, will affect the welfare of generations yet unborn. My friends, I close on a note of hope. We are not lulled by the momentary calm of the sea or the somewhat clearer skies above. We know the turbulence that lies below and the storms that are beyond the horizon this year. But now the winds of change appear to be blowing more strongly than ever in the world of communism, as well as our own. For 175 years, we have sailed with those winds at our back and with the tides of human freedom in our favor. We steer our ship with hope, as Thomas Jefferson said, leaving fear astern. Today, we still welcome those winds of change, and we have every reason to believe that our tide is running strong. With thanks to Almighty God for seeing us through a perilous passage, we ask His help anew in guiding the good ship Union.
Yeah. Those are the Beatles, those are. And this is Beatleland, formerly known as Britain, where an epidemic called Beatlemania has seized the teenage population, especially female. Some of the girls can write, and they belong to the Beatle fan club. The Beatles sound like insect life, but it's spelled B-E-A-T, beat. And these four boys from Liverpool, with their dish mop hairstyles, are Britain's latest musical and, in fact, sociological phenomenon. They have introduced what their press agents call the Mersey sound, after the River Mersey on which Liverpool stands. And though musicologists say it is no different than any other rock and roll, except maybe louder, it has carried the Beatles to the top of the heap. In fact, they have met royalty, and royalty is appreciative and impressed. Wherever the Beatles go, they are pursued by hordes of screaming, swinging juveniles. They and their press agents have to think up all sorts of ways to evade their adoring fans. Thousands of teenagers in every city and town stand in line all night to get tickets for their touring show. Girls faint when the tickets run out. The other night, the Beatles played Bournemouth, the South Coast family resort, and Bournemouth will never be the same. The Beatles themselves seem to have no illusions. They symbolize the 20th century non-hero as they make non-music, wear non-haircuts, give non-mercy. And meanwhile, yeah, the fan mail keeps rolling in, and so does the money. This is Alexander Kendrick in Beatleland.
They join the crowd at Love Field, waiting to see the president. Already a special cargo plane has arrived and unloaded the president's bubble-top convertible.
Depending on the weather, if it's nice weather, no rain, top would be down. So evidently, for all of you people who will see the parade downtown, you'll see a glimpse of the president and first lady in the flesh rather than through the bubble-top glass on the outside. Fire marshals and all following the plane, which is normal precaution. That is where the president goes. Right into us now. There's Mrs. Kennedy, and the crowd yells, and the president of the United States. And I can see his suntan all the way from here. Shaking hands now with the Dallas people, Governor and Mrs. Conley. Governor Conley on your left. Governor Conley with his arm around the president. Kennedy backs up and waits for the president, who stopped to chat with some of the people greeting him here. Crowd waving, as you can see. People standing up all over everything available to get a glimpse of the president and his wife. Waited out here. And the president waves goodbye, waits for his wife, and back they go to the car. Governor Conley standing in the car with a big 10-gallon hat on. Mrs. Kennedy stepping in the car first. Now the president. They both in the back seat now. Now the motorcade will very shortly start to move out. The presidential car moving out. The president and first lady. Big, beautiful Lincoln. Followed by Secret Service men, the car behind. Then comes the Vice President and Mrs. Johnson, Senator Yarborough. Dallas police out here in force today, doing a beautiful job of handling the crowd, along with a contingent of Texas Rangers. The party now is leaving Dallas Love Field.
With the zipper holding the hood in, because it's easier to put the hood on and off with the zipper than it is with the snaps. Then there's zippers up the side so that the jacket will fit tightly around the hips, keeping that straight, sleek look that it should have. And very often you'll find a zipper hidden in the arm.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You'll excuse the fact that I'm out of breath, but about 10 or 15 minutes ago, a tragic thing, from all indications at this point, has happened in the city of Dallas. Let me quote to you this. And you'll excuse me if I am out of breath. A bulletin, this is from the United Press, from Dallas. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally have been cut down by assassins' bullets in downtown Dallas. They were riding in an open automobile when the shots were fired. The president, his limp body carried in the arms of his wife, Jacqueline, has rushed to Parkland Hospital. And if you'll excuse me if I give some directions and we talk about what we're going to do here for the next few minutes, but Bobby, let's tape this, if you please, particularly the interview with the eyewitness people. It is being taped good. Here's a piece of copy that was rushed to me and was torn off from the United Press in Dallas. President Kennedy has been shot in Dallas, Texas. He was shot as a motorcade left downtown Dallas. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up and grabbed the president. She cried, "Oh no," as the motorcade sped on.
At last, in Washington, a nobler drama takes command. Led by the slim, dark figure of Jacqueline Kennedy, there now begin those measured steps by which the nation bears its fallen presidents into history. On Pennsylvania Avenue, the drums go by, 100 beats a minute. Behind them, the caisson goes to the Capitol, where John Kennedy received power 3 years ago. Wait for traditional military honors to be accorded the dead president before he is taken into the rotunda to lie in state. Few will forget Jacqueline Kennedy this day. Transfigured by sorrow, she stands erect before the world's gaze and makes of her public ordeal an enduring testament of proud devotion. Now, through all the chill hours until the rotunda doors must close tomorrow, the unnamed mourners come, for there has been a death in the family. For 21 hours, there is a ceaseless whisper of feet across the rotunda's stone floor as 250,000 persons answer an unspoken mandate. From near and far away, they come by foot or car or chartered bus or plane. A family from Michigan, students from Connecticut, a naval lieutenant from Kentucky, until the line outside stretches 8 abreast for 40 blocks. To each, it seems the indispensable personal gesture.
Clarence the angel in It's a Wonderful Life says, George Bailey, you've been given a very special privilege. You've never existed, right? If you've seen It's a Wonderful Life, you know what that means. And in a way, you have been given a very special privilege. You have now gone back to that context through a number of stories and so on. You have a very special privilege. Speaking of privileges, I want to introduce Jordan Mroziak and Andy Beasom, who's worked on this. This is the only chance we'll get to see them because we don't usually get together. We almost never did. Please, one final hand for Jordan. Andy Beasom, who's been here on this project since day one. They've done a lot of work. What we're going to do right now is we're going to take a 10-minute break. According to my watch, it is 9:06. So at 9:16, we will go back to February 9th, 1964. Watch the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. I'll turn the lights on for you. We'll see you back here in 10 minutes.